Hello and welcome to section 3. Today we're going to look at going from the cell to the organism. The key ideas that we're going to be looking at are what makes cells and organisms different, how are cells organized in a complex multicellular organism, and what makes an organism truly a multicellular organism. So in the past few sections, we've talked about how both a prokaryotic and a eukaryotic cell have varieties of different shapes and structures based upon the functions that cell needs to perform. So specifically, the function of a cell is going to be dictated or determined by its shape and the organelles that are actually found inside of that cell. Because it's those different organelles and features that are going to enable that organism to function in the different ways that it's able to based upon the environments that it's in. So to start out with, let's look at prokaryotes. Many prokaryotes have what we call flagellum. These are long hair-like structures that grow out of the cell, and what these do is these allow the cell to move quickly through its environment. Okay, so it's not really a fin, but it kind of works like a fin. It's going to kind of project that cell like through this, through the means in which it needs to be transported. They also have these short little, they're still kind of like hair-like, but they're little growths called pili. And what the pili do is these allow the cell to attach to surfaces or other cells. So here we have a prokaryotic cell, and you can see that these long structures here are what we call the flagella or flagellum. Okay, so these right here are kind of what help project that prokaryotic cell forward. Okay, the pili are going to be like these little hair-like structures that are along the outside edges. And again, this is what, it's kind of, think of it like a burr. This is what allows that cell then to kind of attach to other surfaces or other cells. Now when we look at eukaryotic cells, okay, depending upon the function, okay, of the actual cell itself, we might have different internals of eukaryotic cells because of what the functionality is of that cell. So for example, here we use the example of a muscle cell. Now because muscles require a large amount of energy, a muscle cell is going to contain many mitochondria. Now, typically speaking, we talk about animal and plant cells quite a bit, and that's because these are two different types of eukaryotic cells. Both of these have many of the same organelles, but I want you to know that plant cells have different internal components from those of from animal cells as well. So they have some commonalities, but they also have some differences. And some of those differences would be that plants have what we call chloroplast. They have that central vacuole, which we've talked about, and they also have a cell wall. Now when we look at the picture here, over on the left we have what we call, we have the plant cell, and on the right we have an animal cell. So just to kind of look at a few differences and similarities, the easy thing is to go right down the center. Okay, we can see that both plant and animal cells have a nucleus, they have nuclear pores, nuclear envelopes, the nucleolus, chromatin, which we haven't really talked a whole lot about yet. They have mitochondrions, they both have vacuoles, ribosomes, lysosomes, Golgi apparatus, both smooth and rough ER. Okay, they both have cell membranes, they both have cytoplasm. Okay, now some of the differences, however, if you look on the animal cell here, we have a cell wall on the animal cell, and we have chloroplast. Okay, so that's two differences. And then when we look on the animal cell, an animal cell has a centriole, which a plant cell also does not have. Okay, so these are just a few things. There's a few more. Okay, and we'll kind of touch base on those as we progress through the cell sections. But just kind of in a nutshell, the key thing on a plant is that it has a cell wall, a chloroplast, and that large central vacuole that an animal cell does not have. Now, when we look at the structure and organization of cells, okay, we have different levels of organization. Okay, so the first level would be the cell itself, and then from the cell, if we take a bunch of similar cells, okay, and they perform a common function, we get what we call a tissue. Once we get a collection of tissues that decide to work together, these are going to form a structure which performs a very specific function, and that structure is called an organ. And once we end up with a group of organs that work together to perform major bodily functions, then we get what we call an organ system. So again, we start out with a cell. The cell then is going to build tissues. Tissues are then going to build organs, and organs are going to create an organ system. So just to kind of give you a visual, we start out with that individual cell, and again, that's going to create tissue. Okay, the tissue, once you get enough tissue, that's going to end up creating an organ itself, and then the organ is going to become part of a system, and then the system is going to create that entire organism. Now we have a couple different body types when we're talking about cells. Okay, one is a unicellular organism. Now a unicellular organism can either live completely by itself, okay, or independently, or it can live together in groups. So when we have cells that are permanently associated, but they do not work together or integrate their activities, we call these colonial organisms. So again, the cells are associated, but they do not work together, and they do not integrate their activities or essentially work together. Okay, these are what we call colonial organisms. When we end up with a multicellular organism, this is when we have many individual cells that are permanently together and they do coordinate their activities. This is when we get a multicellular organism. Okay, so and notice this last sentence here. It says true multicellularity occurs only in eukaryotes. Okay, so eukaryotes are the only true multicellular organisms. Because even if we have something that has multiple unicellular organisms working or like living in the same area, that doesn't make it truly multicellular. Those cells actually have to interact and work together with each other. Okay, and this is just a visual here that shows you that when we have a unicellular organism, these are single cells, okay, thus the prefix uni, okay, and we can see that we have an amoeba, we have bacteria, and we have a paramecium. These are all single cellular organisms or unicellular organisms. Now when we have multicellular organisms, these are organisms that consist of many cells that coordinate and work together, and that can be either a plant or an animal. So both plant and animal cells or organisms are considered multicellular organisms. Inside of a multicellular organism, the cells are independent. Now, even though they're independent, they still have to work together, and their whole goal is to create a specialized function so that organisms can survive. Those individual cells in a multicellular organism cannot survive alone, and they do rely on or they depend on other cells of the organism. That's why they cannot live alone. And then the final thing we have here says that most multicellular organisms begin as a single cell, and then they're going to divide to form more cells. Okay, and then those cells are going to grow and become more cells, and they become more specialized, and this is a process which we call differentiation. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk more about this specifically, but for today, this is going to end our 7.3 video. Please let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I will see you guys in class, and I hope you guys have a great day.